Today's video is an hour-long compilation of horror stories that you shouldn't listen to at 3 a.m. You can listen to this video in the background while baking bread, online shopping, or when you're chilling with your friends. You can always leave timestamps down in the comments so your fellow listeners can use it to skip through stories they've listened to. Make sure you've subscribed to the channel and hit the bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next uploads. Thank you, and enjoy the video. I was traveling in Costa Rica with two flashy businessmen who were there to possibly purchase a gentleman's club. We were staying at the Radisson and asked the concierge to get us a cab to the club. We got in the cab and made sure the driver knew where we were going. We were told it was a 10-minute drive. About 7 minutes in, I realized that we were not in a touristy part of town at all. The driver is whispering into his phone in Spanish, staring at us in the rearview mirror. I get uneasy and look at my companions who are clearly feeling the same way. We asked, "Are we almost there?" "Oh, sí, un momento." More whispering. Not good. We're being set up. It's been 10 minutes and we're in a sketchy residential area. I'm sitting in the middle and my partner opens his briefcase and hands me a pen and tells me to stab someone if I need to. What? He passes another pen to the other man. He's sitting directly behind the driver and takes his own gold pen and holds it to the driver's jugular and screams, "Take us back to the Radisson right effing now." The partner snatched the driver's phone and hangs up. I'm just clutching the pen. We did make it back to the Radisson. The jewelry was deposited into the safe in the room for the rest of the trip, and we eventually made it safely to the club. I was young and naive. I'd had my passport for 3 days at this point and didn't really get that we shouldn't have been traveling there with that amount of flashy jewelry. I have two. One, I was flying with my family, I was young, from Fort Myers, Florida to Detroit, Michigan on Christmas Eve, or maybe Christmas morning, and someone tried to set off a bomb in Detroit's airport. Fortunately, they caught the guy before the bomb happened, but that was pretty scary to get around. Two, my friend and I were in the UK and we met a group of guys from California. I'm from Michigan. We had fun and moved on. We were on the same floor of a hotel. Later, we were in Sweden and we saw the same guys. We were waiting at the base of the mountain to climb up and booked the same guide by chance. Then we were in Greece. Now, my friends and I were all young women, and these guys, random Greek guys, started grabbing at us and pulling at us. In the middle of a sunny day, and we are almost being chased by these old men. No one is doing a thing. A car pulls up next to us, and the guys try to shove us in. We start booking it in the other direction as we get to the corner. The California guys are there, again, by chance, which was enough to deter the Greek guys, and we basically cried to them for about 2 hours before they walked us back to our hotel. The Cali guys and we ended up going to a beach together the next day. I never saw them again. First, thank heavens for random kind strangers who are willing to help out. And second, screw random creepy guys who try to take advantage, and worse. There are few things scarier in these threads than the creeps women have to deal with, and for that I am so very sorry. Protect yourselves and stay safe out there, folks. And if you see someone in a bad situation, just a wave and your presence can be enough to help. When I was a kid, my dad used to lead groups of college kids to Central and South America to build houses. One year he decided that we should ride the chicken, but from Guatemala City to Mexico City. Long trip. We got to the border, and a soldier with a hell of a big machine gun got on the bus and looked around, saw that we had about 15 college girls on the bus, and then went and talked to someone on the phone. About 2 minutes later, a bunch of guys with machine guns got on the bus and informed us that all the males had to get off the bus and line up in front of it. I remember that we did it, but there was a hell of a lot of tension in the air as we did. Soldiers crammed into the bus. We waited. Finally, they got off the bus, and we got back on, and away we went. It was a whole lot of nothing, really, but I remember my dad, the leader of the group, looking very pale and sweating bullets. Almost definitely interviewing the females to make sure they weren't being trafficked. Volunteered for AI in Mexico for like a year, and this is not uncommon at all. I was traveling in Nicaragua several years ago when I got lost and ended up having to take a taxi at 9:30 p.m. back to my hostel. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, the taxi driver locked the taxi door and told me that I had misunderstood the fare. He claimed I owed him $100, which was several times more than we had agreed upon. I tried to pry the doors open from the inside, but was completely trapped. Thankfully, he let me out of the taxi after taking all the money I had on me. The hostel workers told me I was incredibly lucky. A few days earlier, a taxi driver had kidnapped another young female, assaulted her, then dumped her barely conscious body in a field outside town, thinking she was dead. A few local school children found her on their way to school in the morning. LPT, when traveling to Nicaragua, only take taxis that have a red stripe on the top and bottom of their license plates. They are the only legal ones, and all others are fake. I love when folks give out useful advice like this in these threads. So, there is some taxi info for any of you who might be traveling to Nicaragua. Also, if any of you have some travel safety advice, feel free to share it in the comments. Let's help keep each other safe. I wasn't camping, but hiking, and it happened over 2 to 3 months in southern Illinois with my girlfriend, sister, and 2 friends who are dating. We went at night the first time, seemed like a good idea at the time. The trail was short and within walking distance of my friend's house. So we followed this short trail out to a very secluded pond that almost nobody knows about. We're sitting on the edge of the lake, smoking and enjoying the view when me and the other guy started to feel like we were being watched/uneasy. And we generally have good instincts when it comes to things like that. We know when to get the F out. But our girlfriends and my sisters said we were just being paranoid. Then it got cold, fast. It was January, but the night we went, it was 60 degrees outside. It dropped to probably 40 degrees in 10 minutes, and there was this feeling in the air that was almost tangible. Everyone felt cold inside and out, and there was, for lack of a better word, a vibe of intense hatred around us. At this point, the girls freaked out and we hauled out, all the while feeling eyes on us. When we got back to the house, the temperature had returned to normal. Fast forward a month. It was a full moon and the perfect time for a night hike. The other couple wouldn't go, so my girlfriend and I went alone. We were sitting on the edge of the pond again, and she got her head on my shoulder all of a sudden. I have an overwhelming sense of dread emanating from behind me, like there is a presence there I cannot see, and I couldn't turn around. I was so effing frightened. I look down at my girlfriend, and her face is cinched up like how she does when she is afraid, and I'm about to ask her if she feels it too, but as I'm about to speak, I hear a woman's voice in my ear. She says something that I completely understand but cannot say out loud because it is the darkest, most horrible part of me in a language that I know isn't of this world. I'm staring at my girlfriend's face, hoping it's her, but it wasn't. And it was in the opposite ear. I started trembling and said to my girlfriend, "Remember everything you think and feel at this moment." She asked why, and I told her to just do it and we would discuss it back at the house. After a few minutes, the presence is totally gone and we start running/walking back. As we are doing so, we both felt watched and both heard branches cracking and odd noises in the woods. We get back and I ask my girlfriend how she felt when I told her to remember, and she said she felt so sad and cold and alone, like she wanted to die, and like we were being watched. I agreed, but was thankful she hadn't heard the woman talking like I had. So I tried to convince myself we were just paranoid. My girlfriend and I agreed to never go back there again. Honestly, and I'm not trying to be a jerk or funny here, if it was just you noticing those things, I would probably say you might want to see a therapist. The feeling of being watched and the voices kind of sounds like some possible mental issues to me, though I'm absolutely no expert. That would be my first concern, though. But if you were all noticing something, I've got no answers. Sounds like never going back is a solid choice. Oh, wait a second. There's more to this story. So, fast forward another month or two and I have a day off and nowhere to go till my girlfriend gets out of class. She's moved out of the house with the couple mentioned earlier, and I have at this point tried to convince myself that we were all just paranoid and there's no way that all this happened, but I just can't. So I, being the curious guy I am, go to the pond alone in the middle of the day. I sit on a different part and have no trouble. So I start walking along the edge toward the spot where everything had occurred, and as I get closer, I hear something following me in the trees, but I can't see it. I sit down and I'm scanning the trees on the opposite bank when I get the feeling again. Temperature drops by 20 degrees and cold terror fills me. I'm just looking down because I am paralyzed with terror. It was like a dream. I slowly looked up just a little bit and saw the reflection of a woman dressed in black rags 6 feet away from me in the pond, but no woman. As I see that god-awful apparition, I hear a blood-curdling scream from the woods behind me, and I whip around. When I look back at the pond, the woman was gone. I knew I had to get the F out, but that meant going through those horrible woods. I take off running and start hearing breathing, cackling, and footsteps behind me, and it gets to where I feel as if it is right on top of me. I whip out my knife and turn around, and there is nothing but cold malice in the air, and again she speaks to me. Different words this time, but the same language. I took off, jumped in my car, and sped off. I will never go back to that place, because the worst thing is, the woman I saw is the same woman I have seen since I was in 3rd grade, and I started getting recurring nightmares 3 to 4 times a year. Also a effed up story. For a little background info, my sister is an atheist and doesn't believe in paranormal things. My girlfriend and the other couple are spiritual, but until this didn't put too much stock in ghosts or other supernatural things, and my beliefs are my own. None of us know how to explain what happened, and all go camping, hiking, exploring all the time. This was not random chance or animal. This was something else. I know not many people will believe me, but there has been zero embellishment to this story. Well, that last part is written in a way where I feel like I'm reading a novelization of one of the Conjuring movies or something. Sorry, I'm not trying to discredit the OP by saying that. I just don't typically expect prosy writing like this in these stories. I really don't know what to make of this, but I would be curious to know more. This happened maybe 20 years ago when 3 friends and I went camping at Kentucky Lake, well, technically Lake Barkley. So we had just settled on a campsite after hiking maybe an hour from where we parked. It was on a small inlet, maybe 300 yards long and 500 yards to the opposite shore. We had it all to ourselves and camped near the U-bend of the inlet. So we had a limited view of the lake proper. We could see it to the left, but it was mostly blocked by the trees on the opposite side of the little bay. It being relatively hot and humid, we were all standing in the water after having set up our tents and such. The sun had gone down maybe an hour earlier, so there was still a little light left. I think it was early summer or late spring. So we're standing there shooting the breeze, up to our shoulders in the water. It felt great. Suddenly, above us, there was a meteor-like fireball that lasted maybe 2 seconds at most. It appeared to be very close, but there's no way to be certain. We saw it fall behind the opposite spit of land and presumably land in the lake. Immediately afterwards, the entire lake lit up, seemingly from the bottom. Seriously, all the water visible from where we were standing, including our little inlet and the portion of the lake proper, lit up like the entire floor of the lake was made of spotlights. It flashed 2 or 3 times and went out. There was no accompanying sound whatsoever. A few seconds went by when one of the guys asked, "Okay, did anybody else see that?" Which was followed by an evening of us all theorizing what it could have been. To this day, none of us have any idea what it was, but we all saw it. It may not be as weird or terrifying as some of the other stories here, but it's easily the strangest thing I've ever seen. This isn't the first paranormal encounter I've had, but it is only the second time someone was with me when something strange and inexplicable happened. We moved into the new house we're currently living in October of last year. I should mention, the house we came from also had its share of really creepy happenings, and there is one event that I feel is connected to what happened in the new house. I was home alone with my dog, reading on my bed. My parents at the time were remodeling their bathroom and had met with the man who would be doing the job at the home improvement store down the block to look at tiles. Now, this whole encounter is quick and over in a matter of seconds, if I'm going to be honest with you, but even now, years later, I struggle to get out with shaky hands on my keyboard. Before I get on with it, I just want to say I was in near silence, meaning no music was playing, no TV, my laptop was off and charging, I was not on my phone, no headphones in. Basically, I wasn't doing anything that would cause a noise, and seeing as I was home alone, the only source of a human voice would have been me. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of the AC, so I was on my bed reading. My dog was downstairs, presumably napping since he was like 12 years old at the time. He's still kicking, he's 17, and has a heart condition that causes him to get tired easily. All of a sudden, I hear my mom's voice greeting the dog like she always does when she comes home, and I mean exactly the way she does, switching between English and Spanish, the same tone, everything. I stood up and stretched, but realized I hadn't heard the door open. So I approached the stairs and very confusedly called out to my mom. "Mom?" Silence, and then my dog started screaming. I mean screaming as if he was being tortured, crying and whining, and I started calling out to him, scared out of my mind. I took the first step of the stairs down and immediately froze. Something felt so very wrong. I was flushed with this fear. I knew without a doubt that whatever greeted my dog was not my mom. Whatever it was, it literally froze me with fear. My dog finally came running up, zoomed right past me, into my room, headed into my bathroom, and hid behind the toilet. Mind you, through tears and shaky hands, I did call my mom. I practically blew her phone up, but all I got was voicemail. That was the first time something like that had happened to me, and I knew I couldn't just explain it off and shelve it in the back of my mind. Later, when my mom got home and I told both my parents what happened, they brushed it off and thought I was just imagining things. The second time is actually what I'm writing this post on. It happened in November of last year, but in between moving and settling in, finding a new job, my grandmother's declining health, and how scared crapless my mom was now has been the only time I've gotten to keep calm and tell the story of my second encounter with what I now refer to as the Mimic. This new house we moved into was built literally a month before we moved in, the neighborhood still under construction. My mom and I were sitting in the family room giving each other pedicures. My stepfather had gone out with my grandfather to run some errands. We were watching something on Netflix when we both heard my stepdad come in through the front door. My mom called out to him, "Are you okay?" To which we both heard him respond, "Yeah, honey, I'm good." We heard him open the garage door and go in, obviously thinking nothing of it. 20 minutes pass, and we both nearly jump out of our skins when my grandfather opens the backyard door in the family room, peeks his head in, and asks us to open the garage when we had a chance so they could unload the groceries. My mom and I look at each other, again confused as it seems to be an ongoing theme, and she tells him, "Isn't it open? He just came in." We both look at each other, and she starts calling out to him, but my grandfather cuts her off and tells her that's impossible because my stepdad was out back. We go out to look, and there, getting out of his car, not to confuse anyone, we have a huge backyard, fenced in, and my parents are in the midst of fixing up the backyard of this new house, so my grandfather has gone to the home improvement store to pick up some supplies and cement blocks to stand in the barbecue on. That's why they had brought the car to the back, was my stepdad. I look at my mom to see she has the same petrified look on her face. My stepdad, still getting out of the car, not looking at us, goes, "Sorry guys, I left the house key by accident. Can you open the garage door so we can unload the groceries?" Second fridge and garage, 6 people in one home, guys. My mom takes off inside with me, trailing behind her, and lo and behold, the lock on the front door was still on and the garage door was still locked as well. Guys, I can't even explain how terrifying that was for my mom and me. We don't speak of it. That day, my parents fought for hours, my mom thinking it was my stepdad playing some kind of prank on her, but that clearly was not the case. Later that night, when my mom was alone, I approached her and I asked what she thought about what happened. My mom looked at me very sharply, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Don't ever talk about this again. Don't." I didn't think to connect the two experiences till now. That is really creepy, but it leaves the question of just what the heck the Mimic wanted. Like, there seems to be no evidence of it bothering you or doing anything. Nothing missing from the house. Not trying to insult here, but it seems so pointless, you know? Even ghost stories with random things being moved and whatnot feel like they can be explained as just restless spirits being restless, but this thing seems to have no motive or reason aside from briefly tricking you and scaring the crap out of your dog. Creepy. Most recently, last night, I was accidentally locked out of my apartment. My first thought was that this was due to a misunderstanding. I live with my little sister, and she probably thought I was asleep in my room before she locked the deadbolt and put the bar down that keeps the door shut, in case someone tried to kick it in. Both of us had company over, and I was taking my boyfriend back to his apartment down the street. We left pretty late, and when I came back alone, I found that I couldn't open the door, even though I had unlocked the lock from the outside. I knocked pretty hard on the door, but it was close to 3 a.m. and I didn't want to wake my neighbors up. My sister wouldn't answer calls or texts. My best move was to head to my boyfriend's to pass the time until I could come back with the sun being up. When we came back at around 8 a.m., she still wasn't answering her phone. My boyfriend then climbed the balcony and was able to get in through the patio door. Thank God it was actually unlocked. He let me in after unlocking the deadbolt and moving the kick bar, and we passed out in my room for several hours. I texted my sister when I woke up to ask why she locked me out, and she told me that when she was walking her friend out to the door, right by my bedroom, she checked to make sure I was there. I was confused because by this time I had left with my boyfriend. She said that she called out and asked if I was there, and she heard my voice answer back, "Yes, I'm here," as in for the night. I don't typically speak like this. I usually just say, "Yeah, I'm here," in response. She heard that confirmation and then let her friend out and locked the keyed lock and deadbolt and put down the kick bar. Strangely enough, her friend also heard a man's voice in the room very briefly, which they assumed was my boyfriend. The other time my sister and I had a similar encounter was at the house we last lived in. I was downstairs when she asked through my upstairs bedroom door if I wanted to come have food with her. She heard a laugh and "you're funny" in my voice, muffled through the door of course, but she thought it was me. She dismissed it as me being on the phone or in a weird mood. Within about a minute of that happening, I called up the stairway to her and she poked her head down. She was very shocked to see me at the bottom since she didn't hear me open the bedroom door or walk by her room. She explained that she thought I was in my room just now, but I told her I had been downstairs for about half an hour cooking. I remember feeling a little creeped out, but decided if I stressed over it, I would just make things worse. I resolved to myself that realistically there isn't much I can do either way. We have had past creepy or hard to explain experiences in that last house before while we were growing up. Objects moving places unexplainably, a piano that made a single note play. My sister actually saw things in her room and heard her voice called out. I'm starting to wonder if whatever this is has followed us to our new apartment. A side note, when we first moved our stuff into this new place, I would often feel like someone was standing a couple feet to my side in my peripheral vision. I would turn and say hi because I kept thinking it was my boyfriend or sister, but of course nothing was there. In all honesty, I don't feel any intense fear from these experiences. I'm more worried for my sister's sake. She gets more anxious when these things occur. I tend to go to the ignore it and it'll ignore you route. My first instinct for the first story was that your sister called out and someone else in the apartment complex answered without thinking or something and she heard them. I don't know, feels like a long shot, and without a detailed rundown I could be totally off base here, but that immediately popped into my head. Now, as far as the previous house, obviously not an apartment, so that explanation is harder to accept. The best I can say is my old go-to infrasound, a frequency caused in houses by wiring and whatnot. I can't fully explain it, but I recommend looking it up. It can cause feelings of dread or being watched, along with very mild auditory and visual hallucinations in some people. It's a big culprit in hauntings and could certainly explain some of this stuff. But then again, I can offer explanations all I want, but it isn't proof. What really occurred? Well, who's to say? Not a cop, but a mechanic. 10 to 15 years back, I fixed up a truck and put it up for sale. It was September. Not long after, a guy comes by to test drive the vehicle and decides to buy. He comes back the next day with a certificate check, wants to drive it home right away without plates. In my area, you have to change the ownership, get a mechanical fitness, pay the tax, get new plates and insurance on the vehicle before you can drive it home. The buyer told me he had just moved away down the highway. He was living in a trailer on a large remote plot of land he just bought and wanted to turn into a trailer campground some 200 kilometers, 124 miles south of us. I convinced him to transfer the vehicle properly before driving away in the truck. It was none of my business if he did or not, but I knew if he was caught, it wouldn't be worth the legal problems. I told him to take his time, the truck was safe parked here, he had all the keys and the ownership. It's not completely uncommon for people to leave their vehicle with us for an extended period of time. But when he left, that was the last time I ever saw him. After a few months, I was wondering when this guy was going to get his truck, but I didn't have his number or address. I was paid in full, and it was no bother to let the truck sit on the lot. Early that December, I get a call from the cops. Apparently his family hadn't heard from the buyer in months. The cops noticed he had switched the ownership of his new truck around the time his family lost contact with him. So I tell them this story and inform them that the truck is still here waiting for him. The officer told me over the phone that this gave her a missing piece of the puzzle and that she could now enter his home. Pretty sure she was going to do that before she called me. I got word after that. Apparently, the day the buyer switched the ownership on the truck, got insurance and new plates, he went home and had some sort of medical emergency and died alone in his trailer. Apparently, he was found on the floor just inside the door, which was locked from the inside. He didn't make it 5 steps inside, and his body was out of view of anyone peering in his window to see if anyone was home. The officer had been to his trailer a few times before and didn't see him. The family called later to arrange to have his truck towed to them in another city. Every time someone leaves their vehicle, we get a number for them and an ETA of when they're picking up. When they ask why, we tell them this story. Well, if that isn't a heck of a thing. The poor guy was dead for months before they finally went into his trailer and found him like that. Even though there was nothing sinister going on, no creepy unsolved elements, this story is still probably going to be one of the most frightening to me. The idea of just dying like that, alone and so unexpected. That is the kind of stuff that scares me. Not a police officer, but my granddad was. He was a part of the police force in the 60s till the early 80s. Sometime during the 70s, he was assigned to a missing persons case that had been ongoing for a while and had actually been reassigned due to the lack of new evidence. Him and his partner spent months on the case fighting for it to stay open. One day they went and searched the missing person's home again. It caused a lot of uproar with the family as they hadn't really moved his things or been into his home since the case had gone quiet. Anyway, they got permission almost a month after asking and found a handwritten receipt for a car in his bathroom bin. God knows why his bins weren't searched before unless it was just missed. They managed to track down the guy who sold him the car. He said that the missing person had mentioned he was going to store his car in a garage till he had the money to insure it. He even gave them the name of the town he said the garages were in. They went to that town and got search warrants for every single rentable garage, even though they had no evidence he had ever rented one. After a couple of days, they found the car with the guy inside. Apparently, his body was almost mummified because of the lack of sun, air, and moisture. I can't imagine what the smell was like, but they think that he accidentally killed himself while trying to do some work on the car. He would have had the garage door closed because his car wasn't insured. He didn't want anyone to see the car and steal it. It was stored in a rough neighborhood where the garages were cheap to rent. He also paid cash in hand, so he never had any receipts. So yeah, he died of carbon monoxide poisoning. It's painless, and basically you just fall asleep and then you die. You wouldn't have realized until it was too late. The guy was missing for 5 months, and he seemed to just disappear for no known reason. My granddad told me this when I was a kid, and it really scared me that people can so easily just go missing or die and nobody knows where they are. Still kind of freaks me out. Not to make too light of tragedies, but we have a theme going here with buying cars leading to death, so let's be careful while buying cars, folks. But more seriously, good idea to tell someone where you are, and whenever you're working with an engine or fumes, make sure you have really good ventilation, dang it. That kind of crap sneaks up on you. You don't get these huge warning coughs all the time. That stuff slowly saps you of common sense and consciousness. Be careful, folks. My grandfather was a policeman and a fireman at different points in his life. His spooky disappearance story actually came from his time as a fireman. He hasn't told me the story in a long while, so I'm a little fuzzy in the details, but here goes. His team gets a call to a house fire in a small village, rural England. It's late at night. The fire was reported by a local who was walking home. Several other bystanders have arrived by the time the fire engine gets there, and there are multiple reports of screams for help from inside the building. They start to douse the fire, and 3 other responders, including my granddad, enter the building via the back door to attempt to rescue the people trapped inside. The thing is, they don't find a soul. Nobody is there. They clear the whole place out, stop the fire, effectively make the building safe. Later on, it's confirmed that the fire started in the kitchen, likely the hob, where food was midway through being prepared. As far as anyone knew, the couple who lived there hadn't been at home. Relatives had no idea where they might have gone that night. My granddad and his colleagues have a funny feeling, so they get local police properly involved. Crime scene investigation uncovered blood on the floor in one room, but any other evidence was destroyed in the fire. They can't confirm who the blood belongs to. It apparently didn't match the blood types of the 2 vanished residents. The fire department are very suspicious at this point, and apparently the police want to drop the investigation in favor of a manhunt for the missing people, but they end up expanding the investigation radius and find that apparently an unidentified van was parked outside the house that left just before the fire was reported. The investigation goes dead, but over a year later they find the burned remains of the man who lived there in a grave in the woods several towns away. They never found the woman, so it was suspected that she killed him and burned down the house to conceal it. They never figured out where the screams from inside the building were coming from, though. Okay, seriously, I really want to go full Columbo on this one and look over the evidence and everything. Seriously, this is a pretty interesting mystery. Obviously, my first thought on where the screams came from is a tape recorder. Tape melts in the fire, no evidence. Seems to me that the wife killed the husband and realized she had no way to dispose of the body and the blood evidence. Burning the house down would be a perfect way to cover her tracks. Rent a van, move him out, burn it down with a tape recorder playing. Oh, and just one more thing. You all been watching Poker Face? That show is like vulgar Columbo, and I love it. I'm a corrections officer for a small county in rural Alabama. About 2 years ago, I had just become a supervisor. I was assigned to Delta shift, which at that point was considered the crap shift. I was brand new and given the task of whipping this bunch of turds into shape. I was barely 1 month in the driver's seat when one of my most trusted inmates just goes ape crap. It was in mid-February when this occurred, relatively cold and very crappy. The inmate involved had been in and out of the facility for most of his life. Papa had nearly more clout in jail than I did. The man was the most trusted inmate we've ever had and was even assigned to work alongside the maintenance officer with limited supervision. Until the night he ate nearly 2 ounces of Crystal Crunchy and proceeded to freak the frick out. Papa asked to be let out to fix a toilet in booking. The control officer let him out and then let him roam up to the booking foyer. Here, we entirely lost track of him. The detention center spent the next 9 hours on lockdown thanks to this. When my officers finally found him, he had gotten into the ceiling access with a stolen key. Papa had watched us from the master monitor in the server room the entire time. Every time someone would look in the server room, he would hide inside the cabinets. If we got too far from finding him, he would scream at the top of his lungs until we turned around. All from the ceiling across the entire jail. Creepiest experience of my life. I've seen some crap. Through the infantry and this job, nothing beats that one. Not even doing CPR on a self-termination. Crap was bone-chilling. Not a cop, but I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and Mikhail Biggs was kidnapped in Mesa, Arizona in about '98. I remember vividly the day she disappeared and all the news reports and posters and billboards. It was like the moment your view of the world changed. She was in front of her house on her bike with her little sister waiting for their dad to get home when they heard the ice cream truck. She sent her little sister in for money, and by the time she came back out, Michaela was gone. The bike laying on the ground, back tire still spinning. Little sister runs inside to tell Mom about the time the dad drove up. She was away from Michaela for less than a minute. She's never been found, presumed dead now, and they think it was a neighbor, but nothing was ever found out. I know I live and work in the same city Michaela disappeared from, and it's just weird. And what bugged me about it even more in recent years, I work for our district. I've passed her home. I've driven through that neighborhood hundreds of times. I know police officers that worked her case. I know office personnel who were at the school she attended at the same time. 2 years ago, in a school not far from her home, another of our district students disappeared on her way home. She was found a few days later, thankfully. I remember in my hometown when a young girl, I want to say maybe 5 years old, went missing. I was maybe 11 or 12 at the time. Kid was playing outside, parents turned away for like not even a minute, and then she was gone. All throughout my teen years growing up, I remember seeing those parents from time to time, and they were never doing great. They never gave up the search in all those years, but nothing ever came of it. And I can't imagine the kind of human being who would do that to a child and her family. Okay, late to the party, but still want to share for my fellow night shifters. This isn't particularly extreme, but still gives me the chills. I used to work as a pharmacy tech overnight at a hospital. My job was to deliver meds to all parts of the hospital, to machines that nurses use, like vending machines, but for meds. I hated it. The parts where I was mostly alone were the surgery areas where there was no one really around and the lights were dimmed. I would always wear headphones to keep me sane because of how quiet it was, and every little noise made me jump. One night, I pushed my carton into an empty, dimly lit room as usual. As I went to punch in my password to access the machine, in the reflection of the machine window, I saw a figure of a woman walking in the room. I spun around so fast but saw no one there. I didn't hear footsteps, I paused my music, and I held my breath to make sure I could hear fine. Nothing. I turned back around and tried to fill the machine as quickly as I did and gunned it out of there. I avoided looking into windows or mirrors that whole week. I guess I'm a big scaredy cat, but hospitals at night freak me out. The amount of people that die there just reminds me that it can truly be haunted. Hospitals, when they are devoid of people and it's dark, are friggin' scary, so I get it. Part of it is the smell that is just off because of the medical stuff and cleaning supplies. It feels so unnatural compared to literally almost any other place you might hang out. But also, I really feel like it's the halls. Super long, straight halls in the dark are, for some reason, way creepier than short halls you can't see down. Doesn't make sense at first thought, but I swear it's true. I inspected an old abandoned hospital several times and would talk to my security guard escort about his experiences. This place could be the setting of The Walking Dead. It's extremely creepy. There's stuff scattered all over the floor, missing ceiling tiles, and only every fourth light or so is on in the hallways. As we walked the building, we could hear doors slam and other loud noises coming from the other floors. He said he caught crystal heads in there all the time. He told me his creepiest experience was seeing a child running on the 4th floor from the lobby area. He searched the entire building but couldn't find anyone inside, even though there is only one unsealed entrance. This apparently has occurred several times, but he told me he still doesn't believe in ghosts. The guards have to walk this hospital every night armed with only mace. I gladly have never gone back, although I drive my son by it sometimes to freak him out. Parenting at its best. Here's what happens if you don't clean your room, little Johnny. A coworker and I were doing some routine maintenance and inspections at an electrical substation. This facility is in the middle of the desert, about 30 miles out of town and 10 miles from the nearest main road. We were the only ones there, so no other vehicles parked outside. We go through 2 locked gates and 2 locked doors to get to the breakers we need to test. When we enter the room, we will be working and we hear frantic whispering above the hum of the equipment. Not a conversation, but a single intelligible voice. The whispers go silent as I step into the room. My coworker and I glance at each other without a word and quietly and cautiously sweep the room. This is an area that gets frequent illegal immigrant traffic, but I had no idea how or why they gained access to this building. We searched every inch of that room but didn't find a trace of human activity aside from our own. We performed our tasks and left, sharing very few words. Once we finished and back in the truck, my buddy confirmed that I had heard the voice as well. We haven't spoken about it since. I was an RA in college. My senior year, I was student teaching, so I stayed on campus during the college spring break since the high school was still in. We had some international students who stayed on campus during the break in my area, so I volunteered to sit office hours and do rounds each night. There were 4 dorms in my area, and the one building only had 1 student on the first floor. I did my first round at 8 and went to do my second rounds at 10 p.m. On the 3rd floor of the building, on my second round, someone had gone to every door and colored in the whiteboards posted on every door. Black marker, solid, parallel lines, each board methodically filled in. It would have taken hours, and I know that they weren't colored in when I did rounds at 8. I had heard stories about that building, light switches randomly flicking off, people seeing faces reflected on windows, that sort of stuff. I decided to skip doing rounds on that floor the rest of the week. Either something was going on there, or that is one heck of a weird college prank. However, having seen many a college prank, I am inclined to believe the latter. College students, especially those in the dorms, get up to mischief in the strangest ways. Like, you go into the communal kitchen space and find someone dumped out a box of Lucky Charms and arranged all the marshmallows in rows by type as a prank. Definitely couldn't have anything to do with the stuff college kids might be smoking. Worked overnights in a gas station for a summer, and it was my responsibility to restock the fridges. We had a garage as part of the building, as well as a car wash. The stock room was across the shop, and in back of it was the side entrance door to the car wash. It was a quiet night, and I was carrying an ambitious amount of inventory by hand. As soon as I set foot in the shop, I got the chills and the hair on the back of my neck rose. I knew that logically I was safe and that there was nobody there, but it felt like someone was walking on my heels. Another time I was in the cashier's booth with the steel door leading to the shop closed. There was a tiny window on the door, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young boy walk out of the garage door. The overhead door was obviously closed, and the path he was going definitely led out there. My dad worked at the haunted Toys R Us in Sunnyvale, California. He worked as a night watchman back in the day to pay for school. Cool gig. Got to sit around and study while being paid for doing next to nothing. Learned to juggle and play guitar too. Weird stuff happened there all the time. Objects would fall off shelves as you walked past them. Lights flickered on and off from time to time. Noises from the other side of the hall. Stuff like that. So there he was in a big, mostly dark store, all by himself, thinking about the ghost. He said out loud, "If there's a ghost here, then that balloon, the red one in the middle of the roof, will pop." Right as he finished the sentence, the balloon burst. Suffice to say, he turned on all the lights in the building and got as close to the door as he could for the rest of the shift. Never trust an isolated red balloon. I work in a liquor store. I do closing shifts alone for several hours in the shop until 10:30 or so. I'll regularly be in the cooler and hear footsteps in there with me. That's pretty much nightly. Also, one time I was counting down my till well after closing and heard a bottle clank somewhere in the store. I walked over and found a bottle of wine standing upright on the floor in the middle of the aisle. I'd just done my nightly walkthrough to make sure all shelves were in order. I'd also just mopped the floor. The tiles were still wet without a single footprint leading up to or away from the bottle. I logged into the CCTV system and started looking back through the past 30 minutes for that particular aisle. Nothing. At one point, that particular camera just slipped out, and when it came back, the bottle was there. Things like this always make me think it's a coworker pulling a prank, but then, you would think they would lay claim to it later and have a laugh at you. I mean, if you prank somebody, but they don't know they've been pranked, have they really been pranked? I mean, yeah, I guess so, but I want to see the look on their face when I reveal my treachery. But maybe that's just the supervillain in me. We had a crazy rich guy from the 16 to 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so decided that when he died, he would be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune, and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones, and his house is a dentist now. This is also the town where that lady went viral going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi a few weeks ago. Ugh, I dare say a Karen going off in any store is infinitely more scary than a guy disconnected from reality thinking he was going to come back from the dead. At least we can presume that guy never bothers people in customer service. There was a woman who was cheating on her husband and got pregnant with him. When she has the child, it was quite clearly not the husband's child, so he kicked her out of the house. The woman broke down and went out drinking, and then, when she was about to return to her husband, she picked up her baby, dropped it down a rubbish chute, and left it there. The next morning, she remembered what she did and went back to find the baby, but, of course, only people with access to the chute can go inside, so she had to wait hours, possibly days, for someone to unlock it and go inside. The baby was long dead by then. The woman killed herself shortly after. This developed into a ghost story later. People say you can hear the baby crying from inside the rubbish chute, and you can hear the woman crying on one of the stairways. A few years ago, a boy who was around my age, he would be 23 by now if he was still around, was up at his family cabin in the mountains of British Columbia, Canada. He was from Alberta and was living there to work at the ski resort during the winter holiday. One night he went to a party at a house and he only lived a 5-minute walk from there. He was walking home with some friends, and when one of his friends looked back, he was gone. There was a search for him, but he wasn't found. There was no struggle or footprints in the snow. The police asked the people who were at the party, but a lot refused to answer what happened, or they didn't know. He's been missing for 3 years now, I think. His mom hasn't stopped looking for him, and she goes to their cabin once a month for a few days looking for him. She is aware at this point he is most likely dead, but she wants to find him so that she can be at peace. This isn't a secret story, nor a part of my small town, but it is in a town where I did grow up going to for the winter holiday. And people think that the people who were at the party know exactly what happened to the kids, so there could possibly be a secret we don't know about. Small high school in Appalachia, just off the interstate. In the early 2000s, MS-13 started moving in, recruiting, since apparently we were a great midpoint on the dog smuggling route to New York City and DC. Few cops, not very sophisticated, no local gangs. But this was a place where half the pickups had rifle racks, and a lot of the poor kids hunted year-round as a key part of how the family ate. When I went there, you could see where the old rifle racks had been removed from the back of the school classrooms a few years earlier. A few gangers moved in, start recruiting, selling hard drugs. Some nasty incidents happened. A few seniors from moonshine families say they want to join up and set up a meeting in a Walmart parking lot, middle of the night, with the gang senior leaders. They show up, start explaining to the gang guys that the town is off limits. As they're talking, about 100 pickups show up and start roaring around the lot with rednecks in the backs, rebel yelling, and firing shotguns into the air. To top it off, 2 kids whose dads were 2 of the 4 local deputies borrowed their dad's squad cars, pulled in with the lights on, and just sat there. The moonshiners, talking to the gangers, say, "Oh, don't mind the cops. They're with us." Now, I wasn't there. My family wasn't from around here since my parents had moved in only about 15 years earlier. But the story spread and everyone knew who the Holler families were. And knowing a few of those kids, I believe that, while it may have been exaggerated, something did happen. And almost 20 years later, the towns 20 miles north and 10 miles south along the interstate both have major drug and crime issues that started a couple years after the alleged incident, while my old town has basically no issues. Those old families are still there. I mean, I'm all about communities sticking together and protecting themselves without needing to involve others. I guess this is definitely one heck of an example of that. A freshman with Aspergers was being abused by his family at home. He was a problem child and got into trouble on purpose, but no one went too hard on him because of his home life. He was a well-loved kid at school and in the community. One day, just before holiday break in December, he was really sick, but his mom sent him to school anyway. Locked him out of the house. He decided to try to get into one of the empty houses down the street through the chimney. Now, this kid was the size of a second grader, but he was too big to fit through since chimneys taper down thinner. Mom never answered her phone when the school reported him missing. Went a whole day without reporting her kid missing. No one knew what happened to him. It was about a month and a half before we knew what happened to him. We all thought he ran away, was alive somewhere, maybe went to his sister's house. Nope, dead in a chimney. The schools organized an entire week of counseling and such. They wore pink for a day and handed out little pink ribbons on pins for him since his favorite color was pink. Everyone was hit really hard by it. That's how our small town started 2020. It hasn't gotten any better, as you can see. So weird that it's almost been a year now. Okay, so I just want to say this is 100% real. So there is a legit haunted house here. I live in Tepalcatepec, Michoacan, Mexico, by the way. It's a small town. About 6 years ago, these bandits that would go around killing people broke into the town. Luckily, they were kicked out. But what they would do is that if someone didn't so as they say, they would take them to big house here in the town, probably the biggest out of the town. They would take them to the basement and torture them and murder them. The house right now is unowned, and whoever sleeps 5 nights in it gets to keep it. No one resists because they say it's haunted. There are dead bodies in the basement. And to get to one of my friend's house, I have to pass it, and this is the scariest crap I have seen. One time the lights were flickering when I walked by, and I saw a woman standing at the second floor bedroom window looking at me. Then the lights turned off, and I couldn't see her anymore. They say they would also take women and abuse them there and murder them. Explains a bit more about why there was a woman there. Also, right now the bandits are trying to get it again, so I am terrified of seeing the same thing unfold. I didn't live here when it all happened 6 years ago. And I don't want to see it personally either. I found out about everything after middle school when me and my friends sat on the other side of the street in front of the house and told me everything. No one has ever stepped into that house to this day. So, there's an old mental asylum. A young World War I veteran was admitted to the hospital. He'd been shot through the jaw and was suffering from shell shock. During his stay at the hospital, he began suffering from delusions, particularly about the doctor. He went to another hospital for a fortnight's leave, and while he was there, he bought a gun and hitched a ride back to the asylum in a mail van. He arrived at the gates and found the doctor sitting on the veranda. So he shot the doctor and chased him through the grounds. During the chase, he came across a group of nurses and opened fire at them. One nurse was killed and one was wounded. The hospital administrator confronted the patient with his gun and shot him through the hand, forcing his surrender. A wing of the hospital was named after the nurse, and a font was placed in the grounds of a local orphanage. The orphanage is believed to be haunted. The 160-kilogram marble font went missing for years, possibly decades, to the point where almost everyone had forgotten it ever existed, until one day police received an anonymous tip-off to a random alleyway in a nearby city, and they found the font behind some bushes. It took 3 officers to lift it into a van. There are 3 buildings in town that are considered to be haunted: the hospital, the orphanage, and the girls' home. Those are some tragic events, and I don't want to belittle them, but I would have liked to hear a little more about the haunting. How were they haunted? What have people seen? And did they ever learn more about that missing marble font? Well, it's not my town, but a village where my grandpa grew up. The village is pretty abandoned now and has around 3 families that still live there, so there's a house near the center of the village where no one has lived for at least 2 generations now. People say that there is a cursed treasure there hidden inside one of the walls of the house. The story behind the treasure is that during the Ottoman occupations of Serbia, one unnamed Ottoman officer was passing through the village with a pot of so-called treasures. When he arrived at the house, he asked the people living there if he could get some water for his travels. The people who live there told him they will bring him some and that he should rest near the tree in the yard. When he got off the horse, a couple men attacked him and tied him to the tree. Then they robbed him of the pot of treasures and mercilessly tortured him for hours before killing him by hanging him on the same tree. It is said that during his final breaths he cursed them and the treasure, that whoever touches that pot will meet the same fate. The men who attacked and tortured him are said that they had died fairly young and that the man who lived in that house hung himself on that tree. 3 years later, there are at least 2 people who are known to have tried to dig around that house in the 1900s, and both of them hung themselves on that tree. Now, I cannot be certain that there really was a tortured Ottoman back in the day, but the people who killed themselves on that tree in the 1900s are definitely real, since my grandfather knew both of them. These days, no one tries to test the story there. Back in the 80s, a couple were driving a motorcycle when they were stopped by 3 men who then arred the woman while forcing her husband to watch, then killed both. The police caught them not so long after. The same night that they were caught, a mob of 300+ people gathered in front of the police department, broke in, and told the sheriff, "You guys did an excellent job, now leave it to us." The mob broke the cell where the 3 men were, beat them up, and attacked them alive into cars and dragged them for 4 miles until a park in the middle of the city, where they set them on fire alive while everybody was clapping and cheering. Almost nobody talks about it now. I don't know if it's considered a dark secret, but in the county I lived in from ages 10 to 18, we had a soldier die under some extremely questionable circumstances. They said he was high, drunk, experiencing mental distress, and raided a nursery, the plant kind. They claimed he was attacked by wasps and ran. He called 911 several times and claimed that someone was chasing him and was trying to kidnap him. In the last 911 call, he said everything was fine suddenly. Just 14 to 15 minutes later, he was struck by a woman who stopped and called 911. He was ran over 2 more times and died. The autopsy showed no signs of bee or wasp stings. The connection to the nursery is due to the fact that it was just up the road from where he died. The place was ransacked, pizza eaten, money taken, but his wallet and phone were sitting on the counter undisturbed. However, the family was not okay with that explanation, especially because he had previously texted that there were some problems with the local boys, since the soldier wasn't from this part of the state. So the family had a private investigator look into it. They analyzed the 911 recordings and found several instances of other people talking in the background, though most of it couldn't be made out, except one. In the 911 call where he told the operator that everything was fine, a male voice could be heard saying, "Tell her." And the nursery? There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints that led back to the soldier. Even though his phone and wallet were there in the building, a lot of people, his family included, think he was killed by some of the local guys there after they got into a fight about something. They chased him down and caught him. He was able to run again after the final 911 call and was hit by a driver while trying to get help. And the police in the county covered the entire thing up because the boys involved were connected to the department somehow. Of the 3 drivers, none were charged for hitting/running over him. I think only the first driver stopped, but it was discovered that one of the other drivers was connected to the department either through family or friendship. It's a crazy story, but you can look it up. Just search Austin McGow. I wouldn't be too surprised since there is a lot of shady stuff happening in small-town police departments, including covering up ours that officers commit. I really hope his family gets him justice. A neighbor walking by, which he does every day, and realizing the cameras were being installed, CCTV van, etc. Next day on his walk by, he stands still and just looks at the camera. Could understand him looking for a few seconds to see how they were wired, what brand, what they might be able to see, etc. But he stood there just looking at a single camera for about 14 minutes. My old apartment had incredibly unprofessional repair staff. I'd call them because my AC would be out and they'd come over while I was at work rather than at the agreed-upon time while I was home, And they'd use my bathroom, poke around through my stuff, type on my keyboard, mess around with my pets, etc. Needless to say, I was pretty livid. I set up a camera and caught them, then took the footage to the front office. I got a personal call from the owner of the apartment complex to apologize, and almost the entire repair staff got fired. Yeah, people going through my house and my stuff, alone with my pets, always makes me nervous. I can't blame you for turning them in for that kind of crap. Unprofessional. I have cameras in my house for my dogs that alert me when they bark and I can send them treats, etc. It basically functions as a security camera. Anyways, we went on a vacation and I warned our dog sitter in advance that we have cameras in common areas of the first floor of our house. One day during my trip at 3 a.m., I review my dog footage because I get an alert on my phone that my dogs are barking like crazy. I normally wouldn't creep, but I was concerned that maybe there was a fire or break-in or the woman fell, etc. The footage shows the dog sitter, a 70-year-old lady, running around the house swearing at my dogs in underwear only. My ex-wife sneaking up to the front door and peeking in the window at 10 p.m. one night, right after divorce was final. Probably a full 4 minutes worth, ordered 3 more cameras from Amazon that night. Worked in one of the oldest buildings in my college town. Was once a Wild West saloon where 2 people were documented to be killed in a shootout when the state was still a territory. In the 20s, it served as someone's house where the youngest daughter was documented to have died in childhood. When I got hired on, even the owner talked about it being haunted. I've never truly seen a ghost or had an encounter, but something about the building, particularly the office to the back and definitely the dirt basement, did not feel right to me at all. Not malevolent, but always off. My first closing shift, I get promoted to key holder. I'm also helping a new girl who has really taken to the whole ghost spiel she got a few days prior to heart. This particular store ranged from small little treasures that were almost too easy not to steal to a few items that cost 5 times the going rate for tuition at the local college. Naturally, the owners had 15 cameras installed that played on a live feed in the office and in the storefront for customers to see to know they weren't being slick. I'm counting the drawer and she's anxiously watching the security camera, just waiting to see something crazy. I'm putting the final totals into a calculator and she screams. She calls me over to the camera feed and there it is on the top right feed. Very clearly there is what looks like a figure in a white boxy nightgown type dress. We are both near peeing our pants, but we can't leave. There's still a bunch of stuff to get done, and the owners and the opener tomorrow will be peed if we just ditch the last half of the closing responsibilities on account of a ghost. We watch it, stunned as it appears to sway. Suddenly, a huge spider obscures the view of the figure. We, 2 grown women, have been near tears for what feels like ages because we've been watching a spider web that the AC blew into the view of the camera. That wasn't the twist I had expected, and I loved it. I mean, spiders are scary too. Not exactly little girl ghost coming to get you scary, but scary nonetheless. My stepdad woke up one morning and found a bucket of fried chicken in our driveway. For some reason, he didn't think it was odd at all. I did and checked our camera recordings. Ends up being this lady walked up to my car at like 3 a.m. with a bucket. She was obviously homeless and probably on drugs. When the camera light turned on, she yelled, "I brought you some chicken," and left the bucket on the ground by my car. To this day, I wonder what was up with the chicken lady. Wasn't a security cam, but this one time my roommates set up a webcam in the living room, which was motion activated because we had 4 dogs in the house, and at least one of them was crapping on the carpet. 3 of the dogs were pretty average on intelligence, but one of them was too smart for her own good. So we all cruise out and do our thing, and upon returning we check the carpet, and there is what appears to be a little chocolate smudge on the carpet. Of course, we were all out together, so we knew no one would have made a poor attempt to clean up any accidents, so naturally we checked the video. And the culprit ended up being the smart dog. She does her business, and right as she's about to walk away, she stops, turns her head, and looks directly at the camera, and after a moment of realization, she turns her butt around and gobbles up her crap to remove the evidence. I was looking for a lost calf out in the woods one night and found a game camera I didn't recognize on the property. It got a few pictures of me. It was my boss's friend, and she had forgotten to tell me. My boss had a good laugh when her friend checked his camera and nervously told her there was a guy with a shaggy beard and a handgun wandering around the woods in the middle of the night. Guy walked up to my front windows, put his ear against it, then walked away. I see him around the neighborhood sometimes, not sure what his deal is, but he hasn't come to my place again so far. Honestly, this might be the creepiest one. The fact that you've seen him around but don't know him beyond that, and he came up and listened at your window? I don't know, that seems awfully suspicious to me. This is almost one of the reasons I don't want a security camera. Basically, nothing ever happens in my neighborhood. I don't want to have to accidentally record some demon walking on all fours with their joints going the wrong way just to see if the same guy dropped off my UPS package as every other day. CNA here. I've been working night shift at hospitals for 7 years now, and I have quite a few stories. Came into work one night, and Jen, one of the nurses, told me and my other coworker, Jay, the creepiest thing that happened a few hours earlier. A patient had passed in one of the rooms abruptly. The room was cleaned and was quickly occupied by another patient who had coded, was pronounced dead, but was resuscitated. Soon after being admitted in his room, he complained to the nurse, "I can't be in here. This man won't stop looking at me. He's really worried about his dog. His dog doesn't know that he's dead." She had assumed he was just seeing things and said, "Oh yeah, what does he look like?" He described the deceased patient perfectly. I could see the chills running down her spine as she was telling us the story. Turns out the man did have a dog as well. The new admit was moved to another room. Jay says, "I don't believe in ghosts. Those aren't real. I want to see it. Tonight I'm going to provoke it so it can show itself." 3 a.m. rolls around and all three of us are at the nursing station. Jay starts playing YouTube videos of various puppy sounds. Soon after, 2 lift team guys come up, we forget what we're doing and start another conversation. Suddenly, we all hear it except for Jay. A dog bark in the same room, loudly, clear as ever. The lift team guys say, "Does someone have a dog in there?" Jen and I simultaneously crap ourselves. Night nurse for 4 years now at an old folks home. Had a palliative care who couldn't sleep because of incredibly vivid hallucinations. She would describe voodoo people around her room that would just stare at her, waiting for her to die. I didn't take it seriously until the lady across the hall, who rarely ever spoke, started seeing them in her room too. Legitimate shivers. Used to work in a personal care home. A couple of times, a day or so after a resident had passed, their call bell would go off in their room. No one was in the room when the call bell went off on any of the occasions. We had one resident die pretty traumatically. Nurses had to perform CPR because he was a full code. That night, the midnight staff said they saw him at the end of the hall just walking down like he always did. Then the alarm on the door to the outside, it was a secured unit for Alzheimer's/dementia, went off. It was the door he always tried when he was looking to get out. Look, I'm a skeptic and I'm definitely not scared by any of these stories. Not creepy in the least, but if some of you in the comments wanted to just debunk these, I'm sure it would help others who are scared, you know? When I was a student, I got called in on a stroke patient. She had coded and they were doing CPR. They worked for 45 minutes, but she died. They cleaned her up and called on the family to say goodbye. By the time the family left, she had been both brain dead and without a pulse for more than 45 minutes. Blood had filled her brain and she was completely gray and started to smell. Suddenly, she sat up and called for her family. The nurses rushed to get monitors and equipment back on her. Started working on her again, she stabilized, said goodbye to her family, and promptly died a second time. Used to work in a skilled nursing facility. I was usually assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. One night, I'm in the linen room stocking my cart and I hear someone shuffle up behind me, then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around and there was no one else in the room. The door was still shut too. Another lady started to complain that a man was coming into her room at night, again Alzheimer's, so I didn't think much of it. So to reassure her, I told her I'd check on her throughout the night. She complained of this man for every night for 2 more weeks. When I asked her to describe him to me, he's real handsome and wears a black suit. "Oh, he's right behind you now, honey." That freaked me the F out. Of course, there was no one behind me. She died the next night in her sleep. About 2 years ago, we treated patients during a fungal meningitis outbreak. Our acute care floor had a census of 20. During this, at least 10 to 15 were meningitis patients, age ranging from 20s to 90s. There are no shared rooms and all the patients were in isolation, no contact with one another. Many of them had the same hallucinations, children in the corners of their rooms and auditory hallucinations of religious music. Mass hallucinations are definitely some of the most fascinating events to me. Like, sometimes you can connect certain dots and come up with an explanation that might explain it, but other times, it's just a creepy mystery. This was when I was still training to be a CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant, at our local community college. Now, we had these regular non-horrifying mannequins we used for all the dressing, bathing, and bed-making practice. They even had, attachments for catheters. But we didn't store all the equipment in the classroom. There was a small back room that was locked off that we had to get some stuff out of one day. I volunteered to go grab it, some clothes for the mannequins, I think, and when I unlocked the door, it was pitch black inside. It was like the room sucked out some of the light coming in the room. When I flicked on the ceiling light before me, on a ragged old stretcher, lay the most inhuman, terrifying-looking, freaking mannequin I've ever seen. I don't know what these manufacturers use for a reference when they're making the face, but they can't be human. It was so twisted and looked like it was in agony. Crap, dude, this thing looked like it was in pain. Effing creepy. Anyway, I grabbed the stuff our teacher wanted, and when I took a look back, I could see one of its plastic eyelids close and open. Freaked me the F out. Didn't go in that room again for the rest of the course. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.